Edward Sterling scanned the party and froze when he saw a woman who took his breath away. Turquoise swimsuit, devastating curves, hair cascading in glossy waves, a smile so shy yet lethal it stopped his breath cold. "Who is that?" he whispered. She turned slightly, light catching her face at that exact angle, and Edward choked on his champagne. No, impossible. Harper Beaumont. His assistant, the woman he saw daily and dismissed as completely, utterly plain. Shit, Edward breathed, watching another man make her laugh, watching every male head turn, watching them gravitate toward her like moths to flame. And jealousy, primal, irrational, white-hot jealousy he didn't know existed, erupted in his chest. 3 years. He'd been blind for 3 damn years. Chapter 1. The Invisible Assistant. Edward Sterling carried his arrogance like a tailored Italian suit, perfectly fitted and impossible to miss. With an 8-figure fortune cushioning every step, he'd stopped pretending humility was necessary years ago. At 32, his tech empire dominated Seattle's skyline, and those who worked under him quickly learned the rules. Edward didn't celebrate birthdays, didn't ask about your weekend plans, and certainly didn't see you as irreplaceable. You were a cog in his flawlessly engineered machine. Harper Beaumont was the most silent cog of all. So utterly invisible that Edward often forgot she possessed a pulse, treating her more like sophisticated voice command software than an actual person. She preferred it that way. Invisibility meant safety from judgment, protection from being the awkward girl who never got asked to dances, the one teachers forgot to call on even when her hand was raised. 3 years she'd endured it. 3 years of Beaumont handled this delivered in the same tone someone might use to order coffee from a barista. What Edward failed to notice, what he'd never once considered, was that beneath those awful beige cardigans and thick-rimmed glasses existed someone who could stop traffic if anyone bothered to look twice. But Harper had spent her formative years being the math whiz who couldn't hold a conversation, the girl who skipped prom because no one asked, so she'd internalized a simple truth. She was unremarkable. She dressed for function over form, twisted her hair into a bun so severe it could give headaches, and genuinely had no idea what she was hiding. Monday morning unfolded with mechanical predictability. Harper arrived at 7:15 to brew the coffee, ensuring it was ready when Edward strode through the doors at precisely 7:30. She wore her standard uniform, beige cardigan draped over a shapeless white blouse, grey slacks that hung too loose, hair scraped back so tightly it looked like punishment. Edward entered on schedule, his blue eyes gliding past her with the same attention he'd give office furniture. "Beaumont, is the report for the Japanese investors finalized?" "It's been on your desk since 7, sir," Harper answered without breaking her typing rhythm. "I also restructured your calendar. The New York flight moved earlier, so I pushed the legal consultation to Wednesday and rescheduled the Microsoft lunch for next Thursday." Edward took the coffee without acknowledgement, sipped, and Harper braced herself. It's barely warm. Steam curled visibly from the cup's surface, but she'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. "I can make a fresh one, sir." "Don't bother." He was already halfway to his office, the conversation already forgotten. Around 10, 2 directors passed Harper's desk en route to Edward's office. One paused, offering a genuine smile. "Good morning, Harper. How are you holding up?" "That analysis you compiled yesterday was outstanding." She blinked, momentarily thrown. People rarely addressed her beyond issuing instructions. "Thank you," she managed, voice tentative. Through Edward's half-open door, she caught their conversation clearly. "Your assistant's remarkably efficient. You're fortunate to have her." Edward's response sliced through her composure like a blade. "She's competent enough, I suppose. Never really paid attention, honestly. She's rather plain, but the work gets done." Harper's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. That's what she did. Absorbed the hits and kept functioning. Rather plain. 3 years of her life, and that was his assessment. She might as well have been beige paint on a waiting room wall. Close to 3 o'clock, Natalie Sterling exploded into the office like a fashionable tornado, designer bags swinging. "Harper!" She pulled Harper into an enthusiastic hug that still made her tense slightly. Casual physical affection remained foreign territory. Over the past 6 months, they'd built an unexpected friendship. Natalie was among the handful of people who could make Harper's shoulders relax. "What dragged you here? You usually avoid this place like it's contaminated." "Because my brother makes every environment toxic," Natalie announced loudly enough for Edward to hear. Harper spotted him raising his middle finger without even looking up. "But I'm on a mission. My charity pool party's this Saturday. You're attending. I'm not accepting refusals." Harper's stomach dropped. Social gatherings triggered her anxiety like nothing else. "Nat, that's really not my scene. Too many strangers, I won't know anyone. Crowds make me—" "You know me! And you desperately need a life beyond managing my impossible brother's schedule." Natalie perched on the desk like she owned it. "You deserve actual fun instead of living like a shut-in." Edward's voice cut across the space before Harper could respond. Beaumont won't be going. She undoubtedly has more thrilling plans. Reorganizing her kitchen cabinets, perhaps. Alphabetizing her spice rack. Thick silence descended. Something shifted in Harper's chest. A whisper suggesting that maybe, just this once, she didn't have to swallow his condescension. Natalie watched with barely concealed anticipation as Harper's voice emerged sharper than anything she'd ever directed at him. Actually, Mr. Sterling, my plan involved binge-watching documentaries on medieval fortifications while alphabetizing said spice collection, because my life rivals watching concrete set for excitement. But I'll take Natalie up on her invitation and engage with actual humans for a change. Revolutionary concept, I know. Natalie's delighted laughter rang through the office. For the first time in 3 years, Edward froze mid-task and actually looked at Harper, his blue eyes reflecting surprise, irritation, or possibly both. Did you just use sarcasm with me? Harper was already standing, collecting a folder, her voice returning to its neutral default. Me, sir? Never. That would be thoroughly unprofessional, and I would never dream of compromising this office's standards. Natalie laughed hard enough to need the desk for support. When Harper finally risked a glance, Edward stood motionless, with an expression she couldn't decipher, before shaking his head and returning to his screen, dismissing the entire exchange. Something bitter twisted in her chest. Even when she allowed herself visibility, he chose blindness. Once Edward appeared sufficiently absorbed, Natalie approached Harper with a lowered voice. That was magnificent. Watching my brother actually speechless because someone challenged him. Best gift ever. I shouldn't have said that. He's my boss. I was disrespectful. I'm probably getting fired. You're not getting fired because he knows you're competent, and you're the sole reason his life doesn't collapse. Natalie gripped her shoulders. And you are coming Saturday, right? Before Harper could answer, Natalie marched back toward Edward's office. Harper heard every word through the gap. You're terrible to her. To whom? Edward asked, distracted. To Harper. You treat her like talking furniture. When did you last ask how she's doing? Thank her. Acknowledge she's an actual person. I pay an excellent salary. Money doesn't substitute for basic human decency. She works for you. She's not your property. Natalie paused for emphasis. Eventually she'll get tired and leave, and you'll realize too late exactly what you lost. She won't leave, Edward said with infuriating certainty. Keep treating her like an object and see what happens. Harper pretended complete absorption in her computer when Natalie emerged from his office, but Edward's sister paused, leaning close to whisper, Saturday 2 o'clock. I'm sending a car. Oh, and Harper, bring a swimsuit. Before Harper could protest, Natalie was already departing with a cheerful wave. The rest of the afternoon crawled by, intense quiet, Harper sensing Edward's gaze even through his closed door, as if he were processing something he couldn't quite name. At 6, as she organized her desk for departure, his voice stopped her. Beaumont, she inhaled deeply before approaching. Edward leaned against his doorframe, arms crossed, and for the first time he seemed to actually see her, not looking through her, but at her. Sir? Edward's mouth opened, closed. For the first time in 3 years, she watched him hesitate, genuine uncertainty flickering across features usually radiating confidence. Finally, he shook his head. Nothing. Good night, Beaumont. Good night, sir. As she turned away, she missed how Edward remained frozen for 5 full minutes, staring at her empty chair, something constricting in his chest as he realized he'd perhaps never truly looked at the woman who understood his life better than he understood it himself. Then he shook his head, dismissing it as stress-induced nonsense. Harper Beaumont was his assistant, efficient, invisible, and irrelevant beyond her professional functions. As he returned to work, completely unaware that something fundamental had shifted, a hairline fracture in the wall separating employer from employee, he had no idea that in 4 days his entire perception would shatter so completely he'd spend the rest of his life wondering how he'd been so catastrophically blind. Chapter 2. The Pool Party Reveal. Saturday morning arrived bathed in relentless sunshine that seemed to mock Harper's mounting anxiety. She sat perched on her bed's edge, staring into her open closet, with the sinking certainty that she owned absolutely nothing suitable for an elite Seattle pool party. Her wardrobe told a depressing story. Cardigans in every shade of beige, shapeless blouses, practical slacks, all carefully selected to broadcast one message: overlook me. The thought of appearing at the Sterling estate, dressed like a misplaced office worker, made her stomach churn with dread. 3 times she reached for her phone to cancel on Natalie. 3 times she began composing apologetic texts. 3 times she deleted them, knowing Natalie wouldn't accept her withdrawal. But at 11, As she contemplated a fourth attempt, her doorbell chimed with an insistence that could only mean one thing. Harper opened the door to find Natalie Sterling planted in her hallway, arms loaded with at least 6 designer shopping bags, wearing a smile that screamed incoming trouble. "Don't even start," Natalie announced before Harper could speak, gently pushing past her and depositing the bags across the small sofa. "I've been tracking your panic spiral since last night. I know you too well, so I came armed to demolish every excuse before you voice them." "Nat, I genuinely don't think I can handle this," Harper began, her voice small and trembling. "I'm not the type who belongs at elegant parties surrounded by wealthy, gorgeous people. I'm the girl who stays home with books and documentaries. This isn't my universe." "Harper Beaumont, you belong absolutely anywhere you decide to be," Natalie interrupted with a firmness that allowed no argument, capturing Harper's hands and forcing eye contact. "You just never realized it because you've spent your entire life accepting the wrong story about yourself. But today you're discovering the truth." 2 hours later, Harper stood before her bedroom mirror and literally didn't recognize her own reflection. It was as though someone had replaced her with a stranger who wore her face but inhabited an entirely different reality. The turquoise swimsuit Natalie had insisted upon, which Harper had protested as too revealing, "Nat, I absolutely cannot," hugged curves she'd never acknowledged because clothing had always served function, never form. Her hair hung loose for the first time in years, cascading in glossy waves past her shoulders. Natalie had been genuinely stunned when she'd released the bun. "You've been hiding this in that painful-looking bun every single day?" "Harper, that's practically a criminal offense." The contact lenses Natalie provided made Harper's brown eyes appear enormous and expressive, without the barrier of thick frames, while the subtle makeup emphasized cheekbones she hadn't known existed, and lips Natalie insisted were runway-worthy. "Nat, this can't be me," Harper whispered, touching her own face as if needing confirmation of reality. "I don't recognize this person. It's like looking at someone else entirely." "This is you, Harper," Natalie said with unwavering conviction, standing behind her to study both their reflections. "You just never allowed her to surface because you convinced yourself it wasn't worth the effort, that it wouldn't change anything, that you were too unremarkable to matter. But look at yourself now and honestly tell me you see unremarkable." Harper looked, truly looked, and saw graceful curves, fair skin, lustrous hair, striking eyes. Yet that awkward 13-year-old who'd never been asked to dance whispered persistently that this was temporary illusion, cosmetics and flattering clothes masking the truth that she was and would always be invisible. "I don't know if I can accept this," she admitted quietly. "Then trust me until you can." Natalie smiled, draping the sheer cover-up over Harper's shoulders. "And now let's move, because you have a party to dominate and probably my insufferable brother to leave speechless." The Sterling mansion was exactly as absurd as Harper remembered from her rare visits delivering urgent documents to Edward, all soaring glass and contemporary architecture, featuring an infinity pool that appeared to dissolve into the horizon, surrounded by gardens so meticulously maintained they resembled film sets. Easily 200 guests scattered across the lawns and poolside, all radiating wealth and confidence in ways Harper had never experienced. Panic began climbing her throat. "I can't do this," she whispered, gripping Natalie's arm hard enough to bruise. "Nat, there are too many people. Everyone looks magazine perfect, and the moment I walk out there, they'll all stare and immediately know I don't belong." "Yes, you can. And you're going to be phenomenal," Natalie responded with maddening confidence, gently guiding her toward the garden. "I'm grabbing us drinks. You stay here, breathe, and just be yourself. That's genuinely all you need." Before Harper could protest, Natalie vanished into the crowd with the ease of someone born for such environments, leaving Harper alone near the pool's edge, clutching the cover-up like armor against stares she sensed but couldn't confirm were real or imagined. She was genuinely considering escape via Uber when a smooth male voice spoke behind her. "Excuse me?" Harper turned to discover an impossibly attractive man smiling at her, dark hair impeccably styled, vivid green eyes radiating unmistakable interest. "I'm Ryan Torres. I have this strange feeling we've crossed paths before, though I can't place where, which seems impossible because I'm certain I'd remember you." Harper blinked, thoroughly confused. Attractive men didn't approach her. They never had. Her brain stalled, trying to process why this one was. "No, I'm sure we haven't met. I would definitely remember." "Then this is our first impression, and I'm already botching it spectacularly," Ryan said with a smile that probably devastated hearts regularly. "Let me restart. May I get you a drink? You seem a bit overwhelmed, and I happen to know the bar intimately." "Why?" The question escaped before Harper could stop it. Ryan blinked, surprised, then laughed with genuine delight. "Why would I offer you a drink? drink. He seemed charmed by her directness. Because you're stunning and appear to need some relaxation, and I absolutely want the opportunity to talk with you. Shall we? The following 20 minutes unfolded in surreal suspension, Ryan proving charming, witty, and genuinely engaged. Asking about her work, she carefully avoided mentioning Edward or Sterling Tech, and sharing anecdotes that drew unexpected laughter from her. Harper still couldn't comprehend why he'd singled her out when literal models circulated the pool, but he somehow made her feel remarkably comfortable. Then 2 more men approached, then 3. Suddenly Harper found herself surrounded by male attention that left her completely disoriented, because nothing like this had ever happened in her entire life, and she genuinely couldn't identify what had changed. "Why is everyone being so kind to me?" she asked Ryan, voice bewildered and slightly frightened. Ryan laughed as though she'd delivered an exceptional joke. "Are you serious right now? Harper, look at yourself." Harper glanced down, seeing the turquoise swimsuit and the body she'd never considered because it had simply been functional transport for her brain. "I don't understand what you mean." "You're enchanting," Ryan said with such sincerity the words felt truthful. "And the fact that you're apparently oblivious to it makes you even more appealing, because genuine modesty is exceptionally rare." Across the pool, Edward Sterling was bored to the point of contemplating fabricating a work crisis to escape his own party. Socializing with investors and business associates when he'd vastly prefer reviewing financial projections felt like particular torture. He was enduring a tedious conversation about market fluctuations when feminine laughter cut through the ambient noise, and something about that sound made him instinctively turn toward the garden. A vision stood near the pool, and Edward felt oxygen vanish from his lungs so suddenly it bordered on painful. Turquoise swimsuit, molding an absolutely devastating figure, hair tumbling in glossy waves catching sunlight, and a shy yet completely arresting smile that created a strange tightness in his chest. She was surrounded by men obviously vying for attention, and something about her appearing surprised and mildly confused struck him as simultaneously endearing and intriguing. "Who is that?" Edward murmured to his nearby colleague, unable to tear his eyes away. "No idea, but I'm absolutely investigating," the man replied, already moving toward her. Edward continued watching, fascinated in ways he couldn't articulate. When she laughed at something Ryan Torres said, his most aggravating business rival, the sound triggered odd familiarity that scratched at his consciousness's edges. She turned slightly in profile, light striking her face at a particular angle, and Edward's brain simply stopped functioning. No, impossible. It couldn't be, but it was. The facial structure, the nose's curve, that specific head tilt when she listened. "Beaumont," he whispered, choking on champagne violently enough to trigger coughing. Nearby, guests glanced with concern, but Edward didn't register them, completely transfixed on that woman who couldn't possibly be his assistant, but unmistakably was. That's Beaumont." He spoke louder now, still coughing. Natalie materialized beside him, wearing a satisfied smile, promising chaos. "Surprised, big brother? That's Harper," Edward practically bellowed, pointing with a complete lack of subtlety that would have embarrassed him if he possessed capacity to care about anything beyond absolute shock. "That's the Harper who's always existed," Natalie responded calmly, sipping her drink. "You just never bothered actually looking, so you never noticed what stood directly in front of you every single day for 3 years." Edward existed in shock so profound he could barely construct coherent thoughts, because that woman, making literally every man at the party pause and stare, had worked for him for 3 years. He'd seen her daily. How had he never noticed? She, words completely failed. "Is beautiful, always has been." Natalie struck his arm hard enough to hurt. She just concealed herself behind those awful cardigans without even realizing she was hiding, because she genuinely believes she's unremarkable, and now every man here noticed what you were too blind to see. Pathetic, honestly. Edward watched Ryan whisper something in Harper's ear, watched her blush, that adorable flush climbing her cheeks, and laugh with shy authenticity. When Ryan took her hand and began guiding her toward the pool's more secluded area, something shattered inside Edward. Jealousy, raw and primal and completely irrational, erupted in his chest with startling intensity. "Excuse me," he muttered, already moving before formulating conscious strategy, knowing only that he needed to interrupt whatever Ryan Torres imagined he was doing with his assistant. Wait, his? Since when was Harper his, in any meaningful sense? But the thought evaporated because he was already crossing the garden with determination. "Beaumont," he said upon reaching them, voice emerging rougher than intended. Harper turned, and when their eyes met, there was genuine surprise reflected in those enormous brown depths. "Mr. Sterling, you recognized me?" "Of course I recognized you," Edward lied completely, because recognition had required 15 full minutes of staring and near asphyxiation. "We need to talk. About work. It's urgent." "Work?" Harper tilted her head in that familiar gesture that now proved devastating, revealing the length of her neck, the collarbone's elegant curve. "It's Saturday, sir, and unless the building is literally burning, it's urgent," Edward repeated with firmness. Ryan laughed with poorly concealed amusement. "Sterling, relax. Let the woman enjoy the party without discussing business on such a gorgeous Saturday." Edward regarded Ryan with undisguised loathing that would have been unprofessional if he'd possessed capacity to care. "I didn't solicit your opinion, Torres. I'm certain there are other people requiring your attention." Tension thickened sufficiently to slice. Ryan clearly relished Edward's obvious discomfort, while Harper appeared confused, yet faintly amused by the entire situation. "It's fine, Mr. Sterling," she finally said. "Let's discuss this mysterious Saturday emergency." She excused herself from Ryan, who kissed her hand with theatrical flourish that made Edward want to strike something, and followed Edward into the house. The library sat empty and hushed, isolated from the party's noise. When Harper turned to him with expectant eyes, Edward realized he possessed absolutely no work matter to discuss. "So?" Harper crossed her arms, waiting. "What's this urgency significant enough to drag me from the party?" Edward opened his mouth but produced nothing, because what could he possibly say? "Why didn't you ever tell me?" The words finally emerged, inadequate and confused. "Tell you what exactly? That you were like this?" He gestured vaguely in her direction, unable to articulate better. "Like what, sir?" "Beautiful. You're beautiful, Harper. Absolutely stunning. How did I never see—" "Wait." Harper raised her hand, interrupting. "Are you mocking me right now? Is this some cruel joke?" "What? No. Why would you think—" "Edward." "Mr. Sterling, I'm not beautiful, okay?" Harper was flushing now, uncomfortable and defensive. "I'm the awkward girl you barely acknowledge in the office, the one in ugly cardigans and thick glasses, the invisible one. Do you genuinely believe that?" Edward was authentically shocked. "Harper, you're absolutely stunning, you always have been. I was just an idiot, too blind to notice." "Stop." Harper was crimson now, voice rising and emotional. "You're being bizarre and inappropriate. You're my boss, and just because you've seen me in a swimsuit doesn't mean you can suddenly— It's not about the damn swimsuit, isn't it?" Harper gave a bitter laugh. "For 3 years, Mr. Sterling, 3 years where you barely acknowledged I existed as an actual person, and now suddenly you're paying attention, calling me beautiful, asking me to use your first name?" She trembled slightly. "Do you understand how that makes me feel? Like I only matter when I'm visually appealing, visible in the correct way." Tears began forming in her eyes. "I despised feeling invisible, but this is worse because now I know I'm only worth your attention when I look different." "That's not true," Edward practically shouted, desperate to make her comprehend something he himself could barely process. But Harper was already departing, leaving Edward alone in the library, with terrible realization settling heavily. Harper genuinely didn't know. She truly believed she was unremarkable, ordinary, and he had never done anything to challenge that narrative, never complimented her, never truly saw her, and now other men were seeing, were appreciating, and Edward desperately wanted her to direct that shy smile at him instead of Ryan Torres. Hell, he was completely and catastrophically screwed. Chapter 3. The Jealousy He Didn't Know He Had. Monday morning arrived draped in impending catastrophe, and Edward Sterling sat in his office at 7, attempting to convince himself the weekend had been mere hallucination, perhaps bad champagne, possibly sunstroke, because the alternative, that he'd spent 48 consecutive hours obsessing over his assistant, remained absolutely inadmissible. But when Harper entered at 7:15, he knew instantly the weekend had been devastatingly real, because he felt her presence like physical impact in ways he'd never experienced before. She'd returned to her standard armor, that punishing bun, thick-framed glasses, beige cardigan draped over shapeless white blouse, but Edward knew now what existed beneath and couldn't unsee it. He perceived those enormous brown eyes, even through the unattractive frames, the flawless skin bare of cosmetics, the mouth he couldn't stop imagining, curved in that shy, devastating smile she'd offered Ryan Torres. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Harper said in her professional, neutral tone, positioning his coffee with the practiced precision of 3 years' routine. "Your coffee. I also reorganized the third quarter reports by priority, as you requested Friday." Edward looked at her, truly looked for the first time since Saturday, and registered everything he'd been too blind to notice previously, every minute detail, suddenly monumentally significant. "Sir?" Harper frowned, visibly uncomfortable beneath his sustained stare. "Are you all right?" "You're staring." "I'm not," Edward lied reflexively, forcing his gaze toward his computer screen, even though the words there proved entirely incomprehensible. "Yes, you are, and you've been doing it since Saturday," Harper insisted, arms crossing defensively. "It's making me uncomfortable, sir, and if there's some issue with me or my performance, I'd appreciate directness rather than strange looks." "There's no problem, Beaumont," Edward responded more sharply than intended. Return to work. Harper's mouth opened as if to argue, reconsidered, and she returned to her desk with posture radiating suppressed irritation. Edward pressed fingers to his temples, attempting to control the mental chaos that had consumed him since witnessing Harper in a swimsuit. This would be an exceptionally painfully long week. Around 10 that morning, Ryan Torres appeared at the office. Ryan Torres, who had never arrived unannounced in 3 years, walking directly to Harper's desk, wearing a charming, confident smile that made Edward grip his pen hard enough to nearly snap it. "Harper," Ryan said with a familiarity that sliced something in Edward's chest. "I've been thinking about you since Saturday. Would you like dinner Friday? I know this incredible Italian place downtown." Harper glanced up, surprised, then smiled. That shy yet genuine expression, and Edward felt jealousy ignite in his bloodstream. Yes, I think so. That would be lovely." "Beaumont!" Edward practically barked from his office doorway. "Meeting, immediately, urgent matter." Harper blinked, confused. "Sir, I just arrived, and we don't have anything scheduled." "Now, Beaumont." His tone permitted no argument. Ryan smiled with poorly concealed amusement. "Friday then, Harper," he said, kissing her hand again. What was this ridiculous obsession with hand-kissing before departing? The urgent meeting devolved into 30 excruciating minutes of Edward fabricating completely random inquiries about non-existent reports, while Harper observed him as though he'd lost his sanity entirely. "Mr. Sterling," she finally interrupted when he asked for the third time about financial projections for a department they hadn't discussed in months. "Are you okay? Because none of this makes sense." "I'm perfectly fine," Edward replied icily. "You're dismissed." Harper departed, shaking her head. Edward permitted himself exactly 5 seconds to acknowledge he was behaving like a complete idiot before plunging into work, as though that might erase the knowledge that his assistant had a date with Ryan Torres Friday evening. Tuesday proved worse. Harper reached for a file on the upper shelf, stretching on tiptoes, and her beige cardigan lifted slightly, exposing perhaps 5 centimeters of skin at her waist. Nothing substantial, but Edward's brain utterly froze. The folder he'd been holding dropped from his hands, papers detonating across the floor in dramatic chaos that made Harper spin around, startled. "Mr. Sterling," she rushed to assist, kneeling to gather papers. "Are you all right?" "I'm excellent," Edward practically shouted, scrambling on all fours, collecting documents with drowning man desperation, face burning with humiliation. "Perfectly fine, it simply slipped." "You're acting extremely strange," Harper said, studying him with genuine concern. "Since Saturday, you've been completely different, and it's beginning to unnerve me, sir." Edward didn't respond, because what could he possibly say? That he'd spent 3 years blind and now couldn't stop seeing her? That her every breath distracted him? That jealousy over Ryan Torres was slowly killing him? Impossible. Wednesday, Edward did something he recognized as completely inappropriate and invasive, but couldn't restrain himself. He examined her calendar when Harper left for lunch. There it sat, written in her neat handwriting, "Dinner, Ryan, 7 p.m. Friday." He stared at those words for an absurdly extended period before returning to his office in a mood so foul everyone on the floor avoided him the remainder of the day. He was abrupt with directors, impatient with clients, and when he spilled coffee on his own shirt, Harper finally reached her limit. "Okay, seriously," she said, marching into his office and shutting the door. "What's happening? You've been impossible for 3 days, treating everyone terribly, and I swear if this is because of Saturday." "Are you going out with Torres?" Edward interrupted, the words escaping before he could filter them. Harper stopped mid-sentence, mouth still open. "That's relevant to work? How exactly?" "Just answer the question." "It's a date, Mr. Sterling," Harper said slowly, as though explaining to a child. "Single adults occasionally do this when mutually interested. It's called normal social interaction." "Ryan Torres is what, pleasant, kind, interested in me?" Harper crossed her arms. "Because all those things are accurate, and frankly I don't understand how it concerns you." She departed before Edward could respond, leaving him staring at the closed door for 5 full minutes before seizing his favorite pen and hurling it against the wall with sufficient force to leave a mark. Thursday, Natalie stormed into the office wearing an expression promising confrontation. "I heard you're being an idiot." "Well, more of an idiot than your baseline." "Where'd you hear that?" Edward asked, though he already knew. "From Harper, obviously. She called me last night completely bewildered because you're acting bizarre and treating everyone horribly." Natalie threw herself into the chair opposite his desk. "She even mentioned potentially seeking other employment if you're this uncomfortable with her presence after Saturday." "She's leaving?" Edward practically launched from his chair, genuine panic detonating in his chest. "Only if you continue being creepy and strange," Natalie replied calmly. "Edward, you're into her. Not a question, a statement. She works for me, Nat. So, she won't work for you indefinitely, and you're clearly consumed with jealousy over Ryan." Natalie tilted her head. "Just admit it." "I'm not." Natalie seized her phone, opened Instagram, and displayed a photograph that evacuated air from Edward's lungs. Harper and Ryan at some charming coffee shop, her wearing that shy smile, hair loose, Ryan gazing at her as though she were the universe's most fascinating phenomenon. "When was this taken?" Edward asked, voice emerging hoarse. "Yesterday morning, apparently before work." Natalie observed his expression. "You are jealous, just acknowledge it, Edward." He didn't respond, because admission would make it undeniable, and if it became undeniable, he'd need to act. And what could he possibly do when he'd spent 3 years treating Harper like furniture? Friday constituted absolute torture. Harper departed exactly at 5, the first time in 3 years she'd left punctually, with a polite excuse. "I need to prepare Mr. Sterling. See you Monday." Edward remained in the office until 9, miserable and solitary, checking his phone every 30 seconds, as though it might explode with information he didn't want but couldn't stop seeking. Then at 8:15, Natalie sent a photograph without caption, Harper and Ryan at the restaurant, her wearing a simple yet absolutely perfect dress, hair cascading in waves, shy smile while Ryan conversed animatedly. Edward studied that photograph for 45 complete minutes, memorizing every detail, her smile's angle, how she held the wine glass, and something ached in his chest with physical, tangible pain. Another text from Natalie arrived. "Are you going to act or let her slip away?" He didn't respond because what could he do? Harper was technically his assistant. Any advance would be inappropriate, an abuse of power. He'd treated her like furniture for 3 years. What right did he have to suddenly decide he wanted her? None. The answer was categorically none. But the concept of Harper with Ryan, or any other man who'd finally noticed what Edward had been too stupid to see, created something that twisted agonizingly in his chest, jealousy and regret and desire and fear, amalgamating into an emotion he couldn't process. He'd constructed a business empire from nothing, faced hostile investors and ruthless competitors without flinching, but the prospect of confessing feelings to his assistant terrified him in ways nothing else could. He was genuinely, irreversibly in love with Harper Beaumont, and it was catastrophically too late to do anything about it. Chapter 4. The Almost Confession and Epic Fail. Monday morning found Edward Sterling armed with determination typically reserved for billion-dollar negotiations. He'd rehearsed his speech, pathetic but undeniable, at least 20 times in his bathroom mirror throughout the weekend. The words had sounded rational and articulate in solitary practice, but now, seated in the vacant office at 6:45 awaiting Harper's arrival, his stomach churned with adolescent anxiety entirely inappropriate for a 32-year-old CEO. Harper entered at precisely 7:15 as always, grey cardigan today over white blouse, flawless bun, and when she positioned his coffee with practiced precision, Edward felt his heart accelerate absurdly. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she said in that neutral professional tone he'd ignored for 3 years and now couldn't stop replaying in his mind's loop. Harper, not Beaumont, not Miss Beaumont, just Harper, and she glanced up, startled. "Can we talk? Regarding work?" She was already reaching for her tablet, assuming another session of random interrogation like last week. "Regarding us." Harper froze completely, tablet suspended mid-air. "There is no us, sir. There's you, my employer, and me, your assistant. That's literally the sole dynamic that exists. Can you call me Edward?" The words emerged softer than intended, almost pleading. "Why?" Harper's arms crossed, posture immediately defensive. "Why this abrupt shift? Sir, you've been treating me differently since the party, looking at me differently, and I don't understand because I haven't changed, okay? I'm exactly the same person I was Friday before the weekend. Just because you witnessed me in a swimsuit doesn't mean—" "It's not about the swimsuit." Edward stood abruptly, frustration erupting. "Isn't it?" Harper released a bitter laugh that sliced through him. "Because 3 years, Mr. Sterling, 3 years, where you barely acknowledged I existed as an actual person beyond my professional functions. You treated me like intelligent furniture, like voice-activated software with a body, and I accepted it because I needed employment, and you compensated well." She was flushing now, voice trembling. "And now suddenly you're paying attention, requesting I use your first name, calling me beautiful?" Tears began forming in her eyes, and Edward felt something rupture in his chest. "Do you understand how that makes me feel? Like I only matter when I'm visually appealing in the correct manner, visible in the right way, and I despised feeling invisible for 3 years, despised being dismissed and disregarded, but this is worse." Her voice fractured. "Because now I know I'm only worth your notice when I appear different, when I dress different, when I'm—" "That's not true!" Edward practically shouted, desperate to halt her from articulating things that were demolishing something inside him. Heavy silence descended, only their accelerated breathing filling the space. Edward forced himself to inhale deeply, to locate the words he'd rehearsed, but which now seemed utterly inadequate for the anguish reflected in her eyes. "Harper, you're right, about everything." He advanced one step, hands raised in surrender. "I was blind, An absolute fool. I treated you like a function rather than a person, and you deserved infinitely more. You always deserved more than I provided. He moved closer, maintaining eye contact, though witnessing tears in her eyes proved nearly unbearable. But it wasn't the swimsuit, I swear it wasn't. It was recognizing who you've always been, the person who understands me better than anyone on this planet, who detects when I'm stressed purely from my typing rhythm, who makes my entire existence functional in ways I didn't comprehend until I finally started truly paying attention. Harper was silent now, simply observing him with glistening eyes, and Edward continued before courage abandoned him. You make me laugh with sarcastic observations you pretend don't exist. You're so absurdly competent I genuinely don't know how I'd function without you, and I should have recognized this earlier, should have valued you earlier, should have— Edward, Harper whispered, voice barely audible. I know I possess no right to request anything, he continued rapidly, sensing that stopping now meant never finding courage to finish. I know it's probably catastrophically late, and I was insufferable for far too long, but Harper, witnessing you with Ryan, with other men who finally noticed what I was too stupid to see for 3 years, it's destroying me in ways I didn't know were possible. Edward, The office door exploded open, and Ryan Torres entered bearing an enormous bouquet of crimson roses, his charming smile freezing upon registering the scene. Harper with tears streaming, Edward standing dangerously close, palpable tension saturating the air. Oh, Ryan said, glancing between them. Sterling, didn't realize you were— Well, this appears rather private. Bad timing. A moment of absolutely excruciating silence expanded, Edward staring at the flowers as though they were venomous serpents, Harper flushing crimson and hastily wiping tears, Ryan clearly comprehending he'd interrupted something significant without grasping specifics. Ryan raised the flowers. Harper forgot these at the restaurant Friday and I wanted to return them personally. I didn't forget any flowers, Harper said, confused, voice still hoarse with emotion. Well, technically I purchased new flowers because I believed you deserved them, Ryan admitted with a charming smile. Apologies for the creative fabrication. I simply wanted an excuse to see you. Edward felt jealousy so intense breathing became difficult, hands clenching into fists as he witnessed Ryan embodying everything he hadn't been, thoughtful, romantic, transparent in his intentions. I'll leave you both, Ryan said, visibly uncomfortable with the charged atmosphere, positioning the flowers on Harper's desk. Then, because apparently the universe had elected to torture Edward specifically, Ryan leaned in and kissed Harper's cheek with a softness and gentleness that made Edward want to demolish something. I'll contact you later, okay? Seems you need time processing whatever's transpiring here. Ryan departed, and the remaining silence felt so substantial, Edward experienced it physically, as though air had solidified into concrete. Flowers, he said finally, voice emerging flat and lifeless. He's kind, Harper responded quietly, observing the massive bouquet on her desk. Do you have feelings for him? Edward forced the question despite not wanting the answer. He makes me feel visible, Harper said after an extended pause. Valued and special. Things you never made me feel in 3 entire years. The words lacerated deeply, each syllable a sharpened blade penetrating his chest, and Edward absorbed the pain because he knew he merited every drop. You're right, he said quietly, retreating both physically and emotionally. You're absolutely right, and I was delusional thinking I possessed any chance after how I treated you. He retreated another step, establishing safe distance. Forget it, Harper. Forget everything I articulated. You deserve someone like Ryan, someone who saw you immediately, who valued you from the beginning, who didn't require 3 years and a turquoise swimsuit to recognize your extraordinary. Edward. No, he raised his hand, interrupting whatever she intended to express because he couldn't endure gentle rejection, or worse, pity. I have work requiring attention. You as well. Let's simply erase this entire conversation. He returned to his office with rigid steps, closing the door perhaps with slightly excessive force, and collapsed into his chair, staring at the computer screen without truly seeing anything. Harper remained on the glass door's opposite side, observing the flowers Ryan had delivered, tears silently cascading down her face, expression confused and wounded and lost. 10 minutes later, Natalie Sterling stormed into the main office like a hurricane with purpose, observing Harper crying silently at her desk. Then Edward sealed off his door. What happened? She demanded, settling beside Harper and pulling her into an emphatic embrace. Why do you both appear as though someone died? And why are there colossal flowers on your desk? Your brother is impossible, Harper sobbed, finally permitting tears to fall genuinely. He articulates beautiful sentiments about valuing me and truly seeing me. Then Ryan appears with flowers, and Edward simply retreats, telling me to forget everything and that I deserve Ryan. She wiped her face furiously. And I don't know if he genuinely feels anything for me or if it's merely wounded ego because another man wants me, and I'm so confused, and he's an idiot, Natalie stated firmly, holding Harper's face between her hands. My brother is the universe's biggest idiot. But Harper, listen, he feels it. I have never witnessed Edward like this, never. Not when his ex-fiancée betrayed him, not when he nearly lost the company, never. She wiped Harper's tears with her thumbs. He's terrified because he's finally experiencing something authentic and doesn't know how to process it. It doesn't matter, Harper said, voice fractured. I can't continue waiting for him to determine if I'm worth the risk. Ryan wants me, clearly and without complications. Perhaps I should simply— Do you love Ryan? Natalie interrupted. Eyes locked on hers, extended, weighted pause. No, Harper finally admitted in a diminished voice, but he's good to me, treats me well, makes me feel special. Good isn't sufficient, Harper. You deserve what's extraordinary, phenomenal, reality-altering, Natalie said with intensity. And my idiot brother is extraordinary. When he stops being a coward, he simply needs to mature and accept that he's in love with you. Harper gazed at Edward's closed office door, at Ryan's flowers, and felt herself being torn between two opposing directions. One man who perceived her clearly, but didn't accelerate her heartbeat, and another who made her heart detonate but was too terrified to commit, and her, trapped in the center, invisible again in ways that wounded more profoundly than anything preceding. Chapter 5. The Real Confession, finally. The week crawled by in glacial professionalism that transformed the office into an elegant mausoleum, with Edward and Harper executing painfully polite exchanges that broadcast to everyone on the floor that something fundamental had fractured. No sarcastic observations, no shared amusement over demanding clients, none of the small connection moments they'd been cultivating in recent weeks, merely, "Yes, Mr. Sterling," and "Thank you, Beaumont," delivered with a coldness that wounded more profoundly than any shouting could. Edward existed in misery he hadn't known was achievable, while Harper continued seeing Ryan, second date Tuesday, third Thursday, and each time she casually referenced plans or smiled studying messages on her phone, Edward experienced a small death. She appeared happy, or at minimum lighter than she'd been, and Ryan was transparently attentive and present in ways that made Edward loathe himself for never embodying those qualities when opportunity existed. Friday night discovered Edward solitary in the office at 9:30, perpetually alone lately, because home meant confronting thoughts of Harper with another man, when Natalie Sterling exploded through the door without knocking, extinguishing lights en route and marching straight to his office, wearing an expression tolerating no argument. "This ends now," she declared without preamble, arms crossing. "You're talking to her, tonight. Immediately. I'm accepting neither excuses nor delays." "Nat, it's not that straightforward," Edward began, but Natalie raised her hand, severing him mid-sentence. "Now, Edward. This instant, because Harper is saying yes when Ryan requests official relationship status, which is transpiring Monday." She detonated the bomb calmly, observing his face drain of color. "I know because Ryan inquired about her favorite flowers yesterday, and when men ask about favorite flowers, they're orchestrating romantic proposals." Edward's world literally ceased, blood crystallizing in his veins as his brain processed the information. "What?" he whispered, voice ravaged with shock. "You heard perfectly. You have 48 hours, Edward. Determine what you want and fight for it with everything you possess, or lose her permanently and spend your remaining existence miserable, wondering, what if? Natalie pivoted to depart, but paused at the threshold. "And honestly, she deserves someone willing to fight for her. So become that someone or remove yourself from her path." Natalie vanished, leaving Edward alone in the vacant office, staring at Harper's chair, where she invested 8 hours daily, making his existence functional and bearable and authentic in ways he was only now fully comprehending. Panic began ascending, constricting his chest until breathing grew difficult, and suddenly he was seizing his phone with faintly trembling hands. He called Harper, direct to voicemail, attempted again. Identical result. So he typed a rapid text with clumsy fingers. "Where are you?" The response materialized instantly, making his heart lurch. "Why?" "I need to talk to you," Edward typed back immediately. "Work can wait until Monday, Mr. Sterling. It's Friday night. It's not about work, Harper, please." He appended the please despite recognizing it sounded desperate, because he was utterly desperate and no longer cared about concealing it. Extended pause lasting a complete eternity. Then, I'm at the park near my apartment, the one with the small lake. Edward occupied his car in under 30 seconds, navigating Seattle streets with singular focus he typically reserved for critical business negotiations, his heart pounding so violently he could hear blood rushing in his own ears. He possessed no strategy, no rehearsed speech this time. He simply knew that if he didn't execute this now, if he wasn't completely honest and vulnerable in ways that terrified him, he was losing the only thing genuinely mattering. Harper sat on a bench facing the small lake, illuminated by the park's amber lights, wearing simple jeans and a basic white t-shirt, hair cascading in natural waves without glasses, and Edward felt oxygen evacuate his lungs because she was so beautiful it physically hurt to observe. She turned, hearing his approaching footsteps, genuine surprise crossing her features. "Edward, what are you doing here?" I thought. "I love you." The words detonated from him before he could filter or soften or make them more palatable. Harper froze entirely, eyes widening, mouth opening slightly in shock. "What? I love you," Edward repeated, advancing closer and settling beside her on the bench, rotating his body to face her completely. "I know I possess no right articulating this. I know I was absolutely terrible to you for 3 years. I know I don't deserve being heard, much less considered. But Harper, I love you." He inhaled deeply, compelling himself to continue, despite witnessing tears beginning to form in her eyes, something rupturing in his chest. 3 years, Harper. 3 years where I should have recognized who you truly were, should have valued you, should have treated you like the extraordinary person you are, instead of like a convenient function. And I was blind and stupid and completely idiotic. But it wasn't the party. I swear it wasn't witnessing you in a swimsuit or seeing you beautiful or any superficial nonsense like that. He captured her hands, holding them like they were his anchor. It was realizing that the most important person in my existence, the person who understands me better than any human being on this planet, who makes me want to become a superior version of myself, who makes every day bearable and authentic simply by existing in the same space, was always you. Tears cascaded down Harper's face, glistening beneath the park lights. "Edward," she whispered, voice fractured. "Ryan is requesting you become his girlfriend Monday," Natalie informed me. Edward felt his own voice break as well. "And he should, honestly he should, because you deserve someone who saw you immediately, who valued you from the first moment, who didn't require 3 years recognizing you're extraordinary. He's superior to me in every way that matters." Edward was crying now too, tears streaming that he didn't attempt concealing, because vulnerability was the minimum he owed her. "But Harper, I love you, desperately, completely, in ways that terrify me, because I've never experienced this before in my life. And if you grant me one chance, one solitary chance, I'll spend literally the rest of my existence demonstrating you're the most incredible person I've ever encountered. And it's not because you're beautiful, though you're absolutely stunning even without recognizing it," he continued rapidly, desperate to articulate everything before courage abandoned him. "It's because you're you, intelligent and witty and sarcastic when you think no one's paying attention, kind and competent and genuine in ways that are rare in this world, perfect, imperfect, authentic you." Harper sobbed, crying openly now. "You wounded me, Edward, made me feel invisible and worthless for 3 entire years." "I know." Edward squeezed her hands, voice fierce and broken. "And I'll loathe myself eternally for it. I'll carry the guilt of wasting 3 years blind when I could have loved you. But Harper, I see you now. I always will see you from this point forward. I promise with everything I am. So please, grant me an opportunity to compensate for it, to become the man you deserve." "Why should I believe you?" Harper whispered through tears. "Why should I choose you instead of Ryan, who always treated me well from the beginning, who makes me feel special without making it hurt first? Because I love you in ways he'll never possess capacity to love," Edward said with absolute conviction, pressing his forehead to hers. "Because I know you authentically. I know you organize documents by color when nervous. I know you murmur to yourself during complex calculations. I know how you laugh when you think no one's listening, and it's the most beautiful sound in the universe. I know you consume coffee with ridiculous sugar quantities, but never admit it because you consider it unprofessional. I know you wrinkle your nose slightly when concentrated. I know you're kind to everyone even when they don't merit it." He held her face between his hands. "I spent 3 years not paying conscious attention, but my heart was paying attention the entire time. And now that my eyes have finally synchronized with my heart, Harper, I can't stop seeing you. I never want to stop." Silence descended between them, weighted and saturated with emotion, only the soft lake sounds and distant city filling the space. Harper studied his eyes for an extended period, searching for something, and Edward permitted her to see everything: the love, the fear, the regret, the desperate hope. "You're an idiot," Harper finally said, crying and laughing simultaneously in a manner that made his heart leap. "I know," Edward agreed, smiling through his own tears. "You made me feel absolutely horrible. I know, and I'm sorry so profoundly. I should choose Ryan." Harper continued, though something shifted in her eyes now. He's safe, kind, won't wound me. You should, Edward agreed, despite the words lacerating. But I don't want Ryan. Harper finally smiled through the tears, small and trembling, yet authentic. I want you, you impossible idiot. I always wanted you from day one, even when you were blind and arrogant, and treated me like intelligent furniture. Edward's heart literally arrested. Harper, I fell in love with the idiot who complains about coffee even when it's perfect, who works excessively and forgets eating, who occasionally, very occasionally, smiles when he thinks no one's watching and illuminates the entire world. She touched his face. And I hate you for it, for making me love someone so completely impossible. So that's affirmation? Edward asked, barely capable of breathing with hope. That's a you have one chance, Edward Sterling, one solitary chance to prove you've transformed, that you genuinely see me, that this isn't merely guilt or wounded ego. Harper looked into his eyes seriously. And if you sabotage it, Natalie has permission to eliminate you, and I'll personally assist hiding the body. Understood? Completely understood. Terms accepted. Edward pulled her close, pressing his lips to hers with 3 years of blindness and a week of torture and desperate love, all concentrated in the kiss. When they finally separated, both crying and laughing simultaneously, Harper whispered against his lips, you genuinely love me. Even when I wear horrible cardigans and ugly glasses and pull my hair in a bun that appears painful, especially then, because it's you being completely you. Edward touched her face with reverence. But Harper, you realize now, right, that you're absolutely beautiful. You always were. Harper blushed. Smile shy yet genuine. I'm beginning to believe it. When you look at me like that, like I'm the most important thing in the world, it's difficult not to believe. I'll look at you like that every single day for the rest of my life, Edward promised, kissing her forehead, until you believe it completely and never doubt again. Epilogue. 6 months later, the charity gala overflowed with important and effluent people, but Edward Sterling possessed eyes only for one stunning woman in a dark blue dress who was animatedly conversing with investors, hair cascading in elegant waves and confident smile, still retaining that adorable shyness at the edges. Harper had been promoted to another company division 2 months prior, a necessary transfer making their relationship appropriate, and was flourishing in ways that made his chest ache with pride. She was phenomenal at work, commanding meetings with competence she'd always possessed, but now combined with confidence, deriving from finally recognizing her own worth, and Edward couldn't stop staring, even when he should be attending to conversations about investments. You're being obvious, Natalie said beside him, smiling. Literally everyone knows you're completely in love. Excellent, because I am. Edward responded without shame. Ryan Torres approached, smile friendly and genuine. You two are disgustingly adorable together. Happy for you, Harper, he said when she joined them. Thanks, Ryan, and sorry for, Harper began, but Ryan shook his head. You don't need apologizing for anything. You chose who your heart wanted, and I completely respect that, he smiled. Besides, I met someone incredible last month, so everything worked out as it should. When Ryan departed, Edward pulled Harper close possessively, and she laughed. You know he's not a threat whatsoever, right? You won. I chose you. I know, Edward murmured against her hair, but I prefer you close regardless. Controlling, Harper teased, eyes shining. In love. Enormous difference. Natalie appeared shouting, my brother finally has a functional brain. Miracles transpire. Edward rolled his eyes but was smiling, pulling Harper onto the dance floor when soft music commenced. Love you, he whispered in her ear as they danced. Even when I wear horrible cardigans at the office, Harper teased, especially then. But Harper, thank you. Edward looked into her eyes, all the love he felt reflected in his gaze, for permitting me to see you. The authentic you, the one who was always there waiting for someone to finally pay attention. Harper smiled, that shy and devastating smile that was exclusively his now. Thank you for finally looking, for seeing me when no one else did, for loving me when I didn't know I deserved being loved. They danced amid the gala, two idiots who required 3 years recognizing the obvious, but finally, seeing each other completely and clearly. And Harper Beaumont, for the first time in her life, believed it when someone said she was beautiful, because Edward Sterling looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the entire universe, and she finally believed it completely.